Are you ready, Steve?
And so if I can do this, that turns the table. I don't need that yet. Nope, I'm gonna be here, but I'm not. I need to.
We good?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to begin the Riverfront Improvement Commission on Tuesday, July 28th, 2020. We have a quorum. There are 5 of us physically present and 2 by phone.
Yeah, and let's go ahead, if you're online remotely, why don't we self-identify, just to help us out here, please?
Okay, so Dee Brimmer, Chair.
Bill Churchill. Pam Walden. Neil Cosman.
Mike's here.
Yeah. Okay, and then at home? Or?
Right, we have a quorum.
We do have a quorum. Others? There.
All right. Well, we'll start on the agenda with approval of the minutes from the June 23rd, 2020 meeting. Do I have a motion?
I move approval.
A second?
A second. I missed it, I'm sorry.
Bill moved and seconded. All those in favor of the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, opposed? All right, they are approved. Now we'll move to the approval of disbursements. You'll see in your packet that July is not a very exciting month, so you'll see just part of the new fiscal year for 2021. I asked Steve to bring back 2020's budget, maybe the end of August. We can kind of see how our revenues were. Now, all of the expenses probably will not be backloaded yet into the 2020 budget, but probably enough to give us kind of an understanding of where we are, because in September, October, we'll be looking to start talking about the following year budget. So it'll be good to see where we are, but they probably won't close the books and be ready till sometime in October. I know that the auditors will be here October, November, but we should know at the end of August, kind of at least a good idea of where we came out at the end of last year. So that's that. Is there any questions on the disbursements? Want to move them?
I move approval of the disbursements, and I move approval of the billing table, and have a question about the billing table.
Okay, well, let's do the disbursements. Is there a second?
Second.
Neil is second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, Bill, let's hear your question.
You shows the renewal on One River Place.
Yes. Still haven't.
Clear that anymore? Is Mrs. Newell will
Right.
proceed?
Right, we just haven't circled, we haven't connected again.
Before we go on to the next one, for you guys on the phone, I think what we're going to do is we're going to do all of the everything on the agenda except the strategic plan, including with public with business for 2%, and then we'll end the meeting with this looking at the strategic plan, which will be a little bit more informal, if that's okay with everyone. Is everyone okay with that?
Yeah.
All right, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And you guys should be able to see on your screen what we're looking at, so you'll be able to follow along with us. So just don't feel comfortable in piping up. The next item is a discussion of the Mississippi Valley Blues Society lease.
Sure. And so what you have in your packet is a 1-year renewal. Currently, we're in a 2-year, sort of concluding a 2-year renewal. This is for space within a shared suite on the second floor of Union Station. But because the Mississippi Valley Blues Society has requested a adjustment downward to their rent, which is reflected in this 1 year, we have elected to do a 1 year instead of a 2 year, because the idea would be we would return to the 383.33 a month as opposed to the 280 a month, which you see in this 1 year. So they have cited, they weren't able to hold a number of events. You know the drill here. So they asked for this, and I think for a year we can attempt to accommodate, and then we would circle back with them this time next year to see what the ability is on either side.
I think lowering the rent for a couple of reasons. One is, obviously, this is a not-for-profit. We want to be able to continue. When they're on the riverfront, it's one of the most exciting festivals that we do have on the riverfront. Two, I don't think we'd be able to lease the space. I mean, we're trying to lease some space that is difficult because it's big, but this is not a time that people are going out and looking for office space. They're just trying to hang on to their small businesses. And I think we kind of chalk this up and take the loss. And this is something we discuss a little bit with City Council as funding goes forward in the next year, because this is a not-for-profit that really should be receiving some help. And if they had 16 employees, they would be able to, or less, they would be able to go to the federal government and seek PPE. I just really don't know how big they are and what they could actually do there compared to the other businesses who are leasing from us. So I think it's a good idea. I like other people to kind of give us, if there's a different opinion, I'd really like to hear it so we can think about it and we'd approve this at the next
meeting. That's right.
So, any discussion?
I agree.
Yeah, I agree as well. How long have they been in there? They've been in there quite some time, haven't they? Or long?
Yes, because they actually were in a different suite. They were in the Package Express building where Taste of Ethiopia is now for a long time.
Yeah.
So they've been on the premises for a while.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think it's, obviously this is a very difficult year for everybody, and I think we need to consider that.
It's $1,200.
We just need to be mindful of all of that, because I think there are a fair number of renewals coming up, and so I'm trying to be mindful of the whole as well.
Well, I think, again, we have to look at this not-for-profit and we have to look at its viability. Because it brings a very large festival, I think. And again, this is something I think needs to be discussed with the City Council, because I don't know what their views are in terms of festivals on the riverfront, but I'm sure that a year from now, if we're at least being able to gather outside, we would like to be able to host a few festivals.
And just a small plug, since the chairwoman alluded to it, we do have the second floor, I mentioned this at the last meeting, but the larger tenant of the second floor of Union Station, there's about 2,500 square feet listed for lease, probably available 1st of September or so. So we did approve at the previous meeting an agreement with the listing agent, and we have that all out on the MLS, and we have signage you may have noticed if you've been along River Drive, indicating such. But anybody, in any of your interactions, it's certainly appreciated to send them our way. We need to find a new tenant in there.
All right. So the next item on the agenda under projects, so hopefully this won't be a big project, is the election of officers. This is the time of year that we do the election. I just want to kind of remind people a year ago when we discussed kind of our bylaws and the idea of rotation, it was something that Pat Walton thought was very important, that we kind of had a succession plan and people weren't chair forever. We came up with a 2-year rotation, so you see the slate of officers. These would be the same slate for the second year, which would be following that plan. So I'll look for a motion.
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to nominate for the next year following officers: Chair Dee Bremer, Vice Chair Kelly Grubbs, and Secretary Ryan Reed.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Say no. Good, all right, so, we have our officers. We'll now move down to C under, projects would be for you to talk about maybe both C and D. You wanna go ahead?
Absolutely, thank you. Item C, Union Station interior and exterior. Just wanted to give provide you with a brief update that within a couple weeks, I'm told that the visitor center will have the much awaited counselor and sort of begin to open, and then a build out ensue while they're open. They're not waiting for that construction to take place and then open. They kind of would like to have it open yet this summer, and we are out of the way from an interior perspective for them to take over that first floor space and resume its operations as a visitor center. From an exterior standpoint, I know I don't really have a whole lot more than last meeting to update you on, but the news is still positive in our relationship with FEMA and our conversations regarding the repair and replace of the outside area. You all know the story with the brick and that sort of thing. We need to get that repaired. And then similarly or relatedly, having a FEMA flood mitigation project is currently being seen in a positive light from FEMA, and we continue to have those engagements. That's going to take a little bit of time for ultimate approval, but that is something that we brought in a design firm for Graham and have worked with city staff and a couple of us have been part of this to design something that is going to help us live within the new reality that we have with Harrison and Ripley Streets elevated and lack of access area, on the south side of Union Station. So all of that it's sort of redundant, but I just want to let you know it continues. There haven't been any huge hiccups. It's just unfortunately things take a fair amount of time. I will then sort of connect that in with item D if there aren't any questions specifically about Union Station. And in item D is the Canadian Pacific Railroad crossings. And I'm told that things still remain, on, I call it a revised schedule, but they still have the goal, this is Canadian Pacific, of finishing all of the railroad crossings by this winter, by the end of the year. And that's good. And so what has caused some level of delay and some pushback as it relates to the various crossings in particular, there's on some of the maps, oftentimes utilities aren't marked or there's some unknowns, I should say, without getting into the weeds here. And so they've run into a fair number of those circumstances and are attempting to, get the right, everyone together, city, Canadian Pacific, utilities, and they are. It's not, I don't want to convey to you that they're trying to get a hold of one person. It's just happening repeatedly at each of these crossings. And so that necessarily delays some things that can happen in a stair-stepped manner ahead of another. And so, for example, Ripley Street is delayed. I think it was supposed to be August 21st. It was supposed to be completed. Well, you can go by there and know that they're not going to make that. And the revised schedule suggests later September, about a month later. on a positive note, I guess, River Heritage Park shows the month of August and being reconstructed. And so early September, it shows being open. Well, that's nice because the first boat, an American vessel, excursion boat that is to sail currently, to stop here, is supposed to be here August 31st. And so if that holds true, they may only have one or two of the initial stops that will have to be at Oneida Landing, which they know until that reopens at River Heritage Park that we're at Oneida Landing. And so I've been in close contact. It may very well be that American doesn't hit that mark, and they may, by the time they start early to mid-September, be able to have their initial season kicked off and remaining at River Heritage Park. So anyway, all of those pieces are kind of beginning to fit together, but ultimately the goal remains for all of us involved, but particularly those that are in charge of the construction or reconstruction of each of these crossings to have them completed by winter. If there are any questions about that, there's one more thing I'd like to bring up before we move on, and that is on Sunday, August 9th at 1 o'clock, we intend to have the official ribbon cutting of the new deck replacement at the Freight House. And so it is during, farmers market on Sundays runs from 10 until 2. And so, and there will be the last day to see the Wienermobile as well on that day. It's going to make stops starting tomorrow, but also a few days in the next 2 weekends. But that date, August 9th, it will be the last day before it heads elsewhere. And so certainly want each of you to be there. There'll be a brief program with the official ribbon cutting, a really important addition and asset that we've long awaited and are appreciative of. So thank you.
August 9th.
August 9th, Sunday, August 9th at 1 o'clock. And I will send out, as we get closer, something more about that, but want to reserve the date. Certainly would like to have you all there.
Before we, Steve, Michael, do you have a report, or do you just want to stay with us here, or how do you want to do it?
All this night, our group hasn't, the subcommittee met or gotten anything, like everybody, so he's still hoping to get started back in August.
All right.
That's the latest.
All right. Well, you'll be able to share what we're going to be talking about tonight, too, so I think that'll be kind of the first.
Sure.
That'll be back and forth, that'll be good.
Okay.
All right. I just have one more thing, Steve. Since we had our last meeting, I think the city council approved the contract with Howard R. Green and a couple of other firms to look at flooding along the entire Mississippi River. There was a citizen, I'm not sure who the citizen was to pick the company, but now that they have been approved by resolution, I was wondering if maybe, Steve, you could get a copy of the contract and the tasks. I would think that, I think we got to insert ourselves in this regard that it is the riverfront. The land along the riverfront is under the commission's authority, though there are a lot more things that flood than just our land. I think we would need some maybe input sooner than later, not be a stakeholder at the end to see the results, but maybe have the staff have an understanding of what we think about the riverfront and what's important to us and some of the ideas and things that we would like to see continue as they look at this whole mitigation, sustainability, and along the entire way. So if you could maybe get that, and then we could work with Howard R. Green either to have a telephone call at a commission meeting or a couple of us meet with staff. But I think it'd be better if they kind of had a little bit more direct dialogue with us and got to know us just a little bit as they begin their work with the city. Yeah, if you would do that. Is there anything else from the commissioners before before I go to public?
Yeah.
Bill?
Yeah, I'll just give you a brief update on the Veterans Memorial Park. We have asked Chad Dyson, the Director of Davenport Parks and Rec, if it would be possible to mow trails through the facility, the 43 acres that we have on the riverfront there. So people could possibly use the area as it is right now without making major chopping down of trees or whatever. So it would be a usable facility. And with that, our Friends of Veterans Memorial Park Committee is also discussing, and we're meeting tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock at the site with a person to perhaps do murals, obviously veteran related, that we would either put behind the flag poles that are down there now, or perhaps separate maybe 5 murals, one representing each branch of service, and we might put them along these trails if in fact we get the okay to have these trails in our park. And the last thing is, it's within the Davenport CIP budget for 21-22 for $500,000 for the Veterans Memorial Park. And so I have asked A.J. Loss, who is the president of Bush Construction. They have agreed to be our general contractor for anything that we do in the Veterans Memorial Park. And as money becomes available, he has agreed to go over and update the estimated cost of the river overlook, which is one of our phases that we want to develop in the Veterans Memorial Park. And I'm just giving you a brief update. There are some things going, and we're working on the Veterans Memorial Park. And so the next thing that could happen there, if money does in fact stay with the Veterans Memorial Park as budgeted in the CIP, we could be seeing some activity a year from now on the overlook in the Veterans Memorial Park, which would be a really nice addition to that area.
Anyone else? All right, so if we could take, we'll get this back. All right. I think we're ready for public to comment. Bill, did you come to comment?
I did.
All right,
Okay.
you get your 5 minutes here.
All right. I had,
You probably want to introduce yourself.
okay, I'm Bill Handel. I'm a retired architect. I live in Nashville, but I grew up in Davenport. You guys are too far away to pass to the person next to you. For the last 6 years, I've been very interested in the Davenport Riverfront. And I think it's back when the Rothheisen development was coming and to ultimately be built. Yeah, here you go. Anyway, I've been looking with great interest at the plans that have been coming up in the last couple of years, and given the COVID-19, this year is perhaps a pause that you kind of look where we are and plan for the upcoming years. And I wanted to start off with Bill Peterson, the founder of the Peterson's Department Store, took a great interest in the riverfront. And in the first slide, you see this beautiful view of the handrails and the promenade that he and his wife designed after they returned from Europe. And of course, it's beautiful, it's timeless, lasted for 100 years, hopefully it'll last for another 100. The ballpark back then, didn't exist, but it's been a very sympathetic addition. And then of course, the Centennial Bridge really completes the composition as we see it there. The next page, you see Peterson's Pavilion. He also funded the construction of this, also very beautiful piece of architecture, very functional, and it shows the role of art in our community, which is so great. And then the third one, of course, is a Michael Blazer picture of our Main Street landing between Main Street and Perry Street until the mid-50s. This is pretty much what we had, and it was a brick incline, a brick beach. Many cities had it, Very few of them still have it. Muscatine does. St. Louis had a 12-block long one. It all went away when the St. Louis Arch was constructed. But they do have a remnant of something like that. The next page, I want to talk about the relationship to the river. It's Rock Island's seawall, which I think is something we do not want to have happen. It's essentially a bike path with riprap going down to the river. It's not landscape. You can't approach the river. Right now, you can approach the river and the water is just 8 feet away. But there it's like 30 feet away. But then you look at the next page, which is the RDG slide, showing their plan for the area between Main Street and Pershing, I believe. So again, it's like a very nice version of what Rock Island has. You can't get next to the river like you can now. It's inaccessible. It's very costly, but other than the fact it's very pretty, its relationship to water is, I think, flawed. You can see these box-like structures that they're calling frames, and you can see that they're elevated. And if you were to go down to the riverfront, those box-like structures would impede your view downstream of the river. I don't think that's a good idea. I think if you go to the next page, which is going back to our landing, you can approach the river. You can go in the river. Your kids can play in it. And I think that's something I think we should consider. Simplicity is complexity resolved. That's something a lot of people don't get because they think more design is better. Do you know the Figgy? You know, we're instrumental in this thing happening, and with David Chipperfield, this picture would be better in color, but the Figgy is minimalism to the nth degree. It's beautiful. It's going to last 50 years, 100 years, maybe 200 years because of that minimalism. So is the minimalism of the Sky Bridge. I think our riverfront design needs to pay more attention to minimalism. Next page, our Davenport Riverfront, which is viewed from Rock Island. And the next page beyond that is just a close-up of the water. And you can see the water. You know, as a kid, you draw water like this or like that. But if you look at it, it's pretty much, on a river, it's pretty much linear. It's almost like a wood grain. It's very orderly. If you look at the next page, which is River Vision 2004, Hargraves, everything is very ordered, beautiful, kind of like the city of Washington, D.C. They had a particular line, this is before the Sky Bridge opened, of fountains and water taxi to Rock Island, which I think is very strong. The next page, the version of 2014. But then you look at the next page, the RDG design, they have their whole plan is based on turbulence. And their idea of turbulence is this very complicated swirl of some liquid perhaps. And the next page, the close-up of that. Well, if you look at the water in front of the riverfront, that's not what we have. I think that's kind of like an excuse for doing what they did. Their overall plan, there's not a straight line to be shown on this. Very expensive everything, and I don't think we get what we really deserve. It's very, I think, tricky and liable to be out of date, probably within a few years after it's put into place. The Main Street landing illustration, you can see those frames. It's very complicated paving pattern, which, again, I think 20 years from now, it'll be kind of like leisure suits back in the 70s. I would like us to consider simplicity again, which is complexity resolved. And then the last one is think about the water. Let's start with that. Appreciate your time.
All right. So I can talk a little bit better. I think at this point in time, we're at doing the strategic plan. So how would you like to kind of how would we like to do
So
this?
we have Kevin James with Quad City Leadership Consulting, and he, just to refresh all of your memory, we are going to engage in, I would call it a little bit of a pre-envisioning exercise today briefly, because it's the lead up to a strategic planning process regarding more specifically Credit Island and a number of stakeholders of which we're a key member of. And we want that initiative to launch here in the next few weeks, hopefully, but thought it best to engage with the commission. And Kevin's going to help us kind of go through a few questions, and it's kind of, if you're comfortable where you're at, fine. We're going to use the map, although we're really only using, just so you know, Google Map today, because I want to orient you. Many of you know this, but I would like visually to orient everyone into the area we're kind of talking about. Not just Credit Island, but we're really, when we talk about River West, we're talking about the area, generally speaking, from Centennial Park or Marquette Street, downstream to our city limits with Buffalo. And of course, that area is expansive, and it takes on many different looks. I mean, we've got the water pollution control plant down there, we've got residential, we've got Mayhem Marsh, and then we also have Credit Island, and we've got, moving upstream, Veterans Memorial Park, and the area in between Veterans Park and the entrance, the causeway of Credit Island. And so, to back up even further just for a moment, I mean, recall that we're still wanting to engage with the core about the causeway, and of course Parks is very interested in the advisory group, very interested in programmatically about about Credit Island, and so we have many different stakeholders that are very interested in this general larger area, and we want to begin to plan for its future, quite simply. And so with that said, Kevin.
All right, thanks, Steve. I'm going to stand up here and so we can talk and have a conversation. So again, my name is Kevin James. I'm with Quad City Leadership Consulting, and we do strategic planning and employee development training workshops. My business partner, many of you might know, his name is Dr. Dan Ebner. He has worked with a lot of not-for-profits and different organizations, and that's how we've also known Steve. I also have spent 15 years working for the city of Davenport. I was in their finance and IT department right up until March of this year, and then I'm doing this full time. So a lot's transitioned. So I'm excited to actually be in person because most of the stuff's been remote. So what we're going to do tonight is really just a conversation. I'm going to take you just through just a few questions as we think about this area, which we're going to call River West. And I really just want your thoughts and opinions. I'm recording this right now, and what I'll do is I'll go back and transcribe it. So it's really almost like a focus group. It's just to get your ideas. Does that sound good? So when you first think about this area, there's just going to be a couple sets of questions here, and then I'll have us dive deeper. The first one I want to think about, and it's open to discussion, is what are the current challenges for this area? And it's a big area. If you want to hone in on one or two, and it's open for the discussion. What are the current challenges you see for what we call River West? First one to speak wins. Yeah.
I think we envisioned River West because as a commission a few years ago, we had people coming wanting to make a beach and a number of other things where there really appears to be a bike path, but no real understanding of what will come next. And we also worked with the city council to kind of say, what is the role of the Riverfront Improvement Commission? And the one thing that the subgroup really said is planning, so bigger planning. So I see what we do here with the commission in River West and what we do along with the Parks Department and the advisory group is that we're in this bigger planning mode, conceptual planning mode. And as the city has hired now Howard R. Green to do mitigation, we want them to think about how they're going to mitigate with this programmatic ideas. So the challenge is there are some very rough areas.
Some rough areas, that's a
All
challenge.
of them extremely prone to flooding. There's also in this area private property.
So we have private property.
Do we want to acquire it? Where do we want to be? So those are some of our challenges.
Anybody else? What do you see as the current challenges? And I ask them your names now because you guys have name tags. It's great. Bill?
I think coming from the west.
One thing, if I
Sure.
could, I'm sorry, I'm getting some chat back that we don't have to eat our mics. So like if we can back off a little bit, which I just was eating mine.
I'm a loud talker, so.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
So we can just back off just a bit. Thank you.
That's all right.
When you come in from the west, it's a disgrace.
When you come in from the west, say more about that.
And if you go on South Concord Street, it gets even worse. If you get down past Wisconsin, it's a dump.
When you say, are you talking about the infrastructure or properties or the riverfront itself? What specifically? The properties, okay.
I've never understood how they can continue to build up the dump between Utah Street and Wisconsin. It's in violation of every regulatory law I know.
Okay.
And I don't understand why it continues. But if you continue to drive on South Concord, when I was a kid, we used to down and watch people with piles of clams. So there's a lot of history there. But right now, I would not bring say a Carl Montana came from New Jersey. I would not take him there and show him Davenport.
That's that. So that's that challenge. Anybody else? What are the current challenges you see? Anybody on the phone? I think we have Alderman Lee and Kelly.
And
Gwen. Sorry.
Yep.
Anybody on the phone have any ideas? What are the current challenges for this area?
I was just going to say, I think one of the biggest challenges is just public perception of the value of investing in that area, and weighed against other investments the city needs to make in various other locations. And so identifying the value proposition, I think, is really important.
Yep. And that kind of ties into what Bill here in person said. If some areas are a bit rough, Dee pointed that out as well. What does the public think as far as a value, of investing to improve this area? Yes, Bill?
If you want to make a comparison of something, Press Isle at Erie, Pennsylvania was a mess. And now it's got bike paths and fishing piers and picnic areas. And there isn't any reason we can't make South Concord all the way to Utah Street.
And we're going to come back to that here in a little bit. Save that one. That's a good one. When we also think about this big question of challenges, also think about what is stopping people from utilizing it. And we've already kind of mentioned that. When you think there really are kind of separate areas from veterans, the bike path to Credit Island, and then when you start to go beyond that. Is there anything from your perspective, anything, Michael, that you've seen?
Well, I think Dee is exactly right. It's very rough. So when you bike, anytime you go along, there's trees, rocks, flooding. If you're a first-time person, you'd leave with the perception that it's not worth much. I think she's exactly right, the biggest thing. So that leads into, who was it, Kelly, whoever said public perception, the value of the area. I think that's exactly right.
I think that if we just think about in the planning mode, in that area below what I would call the train bridge, if we just thought about what would environmentally, if we just wanted to be in a natural environment, what would it take to do this? I don't think it's a high infrastructure. I mean, we're not trying to do pavilions and bring a whole lot of something there that's in structures, but it could be the most enjoyable ride. I think the bike trail to Credit Island and then going across the bridge and it's supposed to go down South Concord. Those are all trail plans that are in existence now and a lot of it done. What we don't have is anything that actually supports that in terms of feeling safe. Thinking, enjoying, taking your child, you can't really even stop and talk about nature. I mean, you see Hormel 1950 packages and parts of it. I mean, it's very rough. So we need to plan what we would like to see there.
Sure.
I have a comment if I could.
I don't know who that is. Okay, yep, go.
I've walked the entire Credit Island many times, including the internal areas away from the road. It's a floodplain. It needs to stay a floodplain. I don't think there's anything we can do to take it out of the floodplain. And when it floods completely. And I think that's part of its value. And I think it's really important to consider that. It's a challenge only if you look at it as we want to develop it. There are certain things we probably could do within its value in the floodplain, but I think it's a really important natural area, and I think the people who go down there, a lot of times they go to look at the birds, as well as, of course, ride bikes and that kind of thing. But I'd like to keep in mind that the natural aspect of it, I think, is very important. We spent a lot of money on a bridge down the bicycle bridge, which is a wonderful thing, but Concord Street is flooded, the park is flooded, and how do we recognize the importance of that and work within those parameters?
Thank you. Bill Churchill, you have a...
Yeah, I think the overriding challenge of this whole area, with the exception of the Veterans Memorial Park, which is the only area in this River West that we're talking about that does not flood. Veterans Memorial Park is elevated enough, it does not flood, including the flagpole area. Now, the parking lot down there floods, but not the actual park itself. So this is the only area in that whole River West that does not flood. But the overriding challenge of this whole area is the fact that it does flood. And so all plans that we talk about and think about as to how we're going to use this property, no matter what section of this area you're talking about, is, are you going to deal with flooding? I mean, and the cost that it would take to mitigate that problem if you develop anywhere, anything in this whole area, that has to be a major concern. So I think you talk about challenges, that's got to be challenge number one.
Thank you. Anybody else on challenges before we move on? Yes?
Actually, I'm not really a part of your meeting, but I'm here for technical assistance. So I'm Corey Smith. I'm the IT director for the city of Davenport. So anyways, I frequent this area a lot, and I walleye fish regularly in this area. So I'm in there all the time with the kids and everything else. So, and when it's flooding is actually a better time for me because that's when I fish it, when it's flooded. And Credit Island and all of that because it's better fishing during that time frame in some respects. Some of the issues that I've heard and I've experienced this many times, especially with boaters in that area, is the lack of access to gas, places to eat, things of that nature, or at least a place to pull off. And because when you're on the river, you are duly focused on the river, because if not, the river will get you. So you have to have locations where you can pull off and rest or relax or whatever you're going to do, picnic, deal with issues with the boat, whatever it is. So there is none on the Iowa side. Everyone who boats knows, okay, well, if you're going to eat lunch, you better make your way south to Illinois, because that's where you can eat lunch. That's also where you can only get fuel. So those of us who fish or pleasure cruise, we're focused just on Illinois, unfortunately. There are, if you want to, really struggle, you can eat in Buffalo, but there's not a good place to dock in Buffalo and make your way up over the train, so the tracks. So Credit Island is a great location for some of this, if thoughtfully, planned, where you have an area that's outside of the river current, it's open, potentially. The other issue we have is the lack of slips in our area. on this end, or this side of, the dam, you cannot get a slip with power or cover, in this area, unless you're heading south to Muscatine almost. They're not available, and there's a waiting list for them. So I would be happy to pay for a slip, but there just is none. So that's another issue that I've struggled with and have had problems with, so.
Thank you. So yeah, that kind of leads into what's stopping some people from utilizing it more, and those are some very specific details. We've already kind of transitioned. Neil, do you have something about a challenge?
Yes, one challenge I want to kind of talk about is, I know I've ridden my bike over there. I've only moved into the area about a year ago. But one thing that I realized is after going west of Park, north of Credit Island, there's actually some sort of factory that's putting out some sort of smell or something like that I noticed was kind of rough going through. So I don't know how that might affect tourism, or if there's some sort of policy in place we can put there, because
It could have been the wastewater treatment.
But there is industry there. There's another challenge. Industry butting up right next to, well, our natural lands. That is a challenge, and that could stop some people from utilizing it. Now, naturally, we've kind of already went into the next question, really, and I want you guys to think about, and you've already outlined some of them, and Mr. Smith has done that, is what are your ideas for improvements or enhancements to this area? And you can think about them separately or as a whole. We've talked about with boating, slips, potentially access to, amenities like food, gas,
I think the area from what looks like it could be a beach area, there is one private ownership, that bike path as it comes around. So the reason why Veterans Memorial Park is so elevated is that it's a landfill. I mean, it is a landfill, and as it sinks, and it continues to sink. It was our first 5 years of not so good compost that helped build the top bit of it. So it's also got its own natural problems. So I think as we look at the area, I think with a mind to what is sustainable in flooding, what can we change environmentally, what can we correct, what kind of grants can we use, still having from the federal government and other places to help us do that? How do we work with the Corps? I think with the slough, I would love to see a real bridge to Credit Island. I would like to see a slough. I'd like to see some backwaters. To be able to have a canoe on, to be able to pull in and be in a safe place, deep enough that you have a fishing boat that can come in through the backside of Credit Island. I think these are very, and Credit Island being it's an island that floods, and as I talk with the Corps, there's sustainable things that you can do that can, when the water goes down, your land comes back and you're not spending all kinds of money trying to recreate a natural environment. It's not a golf course. It's never going to be a golf course again. But, the internal lake there, and we have some storm sewers. We don't use kind of the backwaters. We don't use that correctly, what it was used for about 20 or 30 years ago. How does that all come back? So that's what I'm thinking. And as you go down, I think we need an eye as a commission of what that bicycle person is doing on South Concord. That's where there's the most private property, and that's probably where the city needs to do a heck of a lot more regulations. But what do we see the future being? When properties come available, should we be purchasing those that have a river access? Because we're looking at that part of Credit Island, I think, over the next 50 years, or not Credit Island, but the Riverfront, over the next 50 years. Not today. Today is like, if I had my money, I'd probably be downtown with it, doing something at the Riverfront. But we need to plan for what would be. So when things happen, a staff in the city says, oh, you want to sell, or, oh, you have a potential to do what, or the Corps says, oh, we have money to do whatever, you know, and the watershed, Black Hawk Creek, how it goes in. I know the Corps is going to look at that. But the wastewater treatment plant and its effluent that goes to the river, all of those, I think, are things that we can look environmentally for, and we could really build a strong understanding of what that is and program that. So I think that's kind of.
Yeah, there's definitely ideas for improvements. And Dee, you even pointed out kind of what are maybe some more immediate versus even longer term. You know, when we get more into this, Steve and I and the committee, there is going to be what's the short term and what are maybe some much longer term initiatives. Bill, you pointed out some things I jotted down before when we talk about some improvements. When you mentioned Veterans Memorial Park, about potentially trails, murals, if the CIP comes through for an overlook, and I know some of those things are already in place. So those are also some ideas for improvement. Is anybody else, for any of these areas or the area as a whole, any ideas, whether it's very specific or larger?
There's a trail on Credit Island that for some reason was abandoned.
You gotta turn your
You
mic on.
turn now, and if you look at the bottom tip of Credit Island, you see I think it's black dotted line.
Yes, so the trail at the end of Credit Island, on the west end of Credit Island, yes? That was abandoned?
And I watched birds, and after that, I've never understood why they closed it.
Okay.
Actually, I think it's the part of the page.
So it might be more of a just a,
Understood that.
okay.
You can, you know, improve that again so people could drive around and enjoy that nature.
Okay.
I think that was abandoned because the police asked us to. And it's very difficult to maintain, and it's very difficult to see. So I think that's what they shortened it up for. But
It was a
it
safety
isn't
issue.
really. I mean, it would be a wonderful, just natural hiking if it was, you know, done in a way that lots of people would use it.
So access to the more west end of Credit Island, however that might be, whether it's trails or if it needs to be more permanent. Anybody else for ideas?
Well, I guess Kathy Wine's been working on this for quite a while, but a second channel cat that will be downstream of the dam.
Second channel cat. Okay.
As you know, if you enter to Credit Island, the causeway at Credit Island is a really unique point. It's at a nice bend in the river, so you see those bridges all stacking up: the Crescent Bridge, the Centennial Bridge, the Government Bridge, and the dam. And I think that would be an ideal place to have a stop. You know, with
some sort of lookout or
yeah. I mean, and you know, with the fact that we've got the former Credit Island Clubhouse, you know, since it has been made flood. What do we call it? It's resistant to flooding. If it floods, it's at least doesn't cost much to get it back up. When I was a kid, our family, we would have picnics down at Credit Island all the time, and you don't see that much anymore. And perhaps it could be some good destination.
All right, thank you.
This is Kelly.
Yes.
So one of the things that is easy for us to forget about, I think a lot of times, is the potential opportunities for use in the winter time. And so I think as we're thinking about some of the long-range planning, and clearly to me, the sort of naturalized opportunities of that whole area are the obvious type of use for it. And I think, you know, I've gone down to Credit Island, cross-country skiing before. I think when you look at the inland lake, whatever you might want to call that, that's a prime place to be able to have some great ice skating. And just to think a little bit more about how we can have active engagement and use of those areas in the wintertime should also be part of our planning process. And to be doing that very thoughtfully and intentionally, so we're creating great activity spaces for the community, even in the wintertime, not just thinking about interacting with that area when you're using the river.
Excellent, thank you, Kelly.
I agree with what Kelly said. In Iowa City, there's a golf cross-country course there that we go. And they groom that now in the wintertime, and there's more people using that in the winter than all the
For cross-country skiing, okay. So there is, so having, especially for Credit Island, having land that is flexible or available and flexible throughout the entire entire year, whatever season it's in.
Yeah, that's a good point. Kelly brings up a great point. And one other use that I've seen on that Concord area there in the backwater of Credit Island there, every time that freezes over, there's not only ice fishermen that populate that area, but there are motorcycles with the studded wheels. They use that area a lot as well in the winter when it freezes over.
Interesting.
It's not very deep.
Anybody else for kind of ideas for improvement?
I wonder, just sitting here, we're considering such a huge area and so many things, maybe back up and compartmentalize groups plan like Veterans Park area, maybe somebody up to the entrance of Credit Island, a group talk about Credit Island, or break up into groups, because it's kind of overwhelming. What do we fix first if you're talking about all of it? So maybe like our park board subcommittee handle a certain part. Is it coming through what I'm trying to say? In other words, not have everybody considering everything, but have some groups, okay, from here to here, and then get together and see if the plans will mesh.
And that might even be part of how we start to plan for the River West, where it might be even compartmentalized within the plan.
So I'm gonna ask this of you.
Sure.
The results of your work would be, to me, I call it the bubble planning, where you take an area and you kind of make a circle around it, and you kind of use the words and the expressions and the things that you would like to see there. You don't design anything, you're not doing any of that, you're doing the big overview.
Yep.
And I think that's what we want to do, and I think as we put the first committee together, kind of, when we talk all this, I think you would be able to help us, like,
Yes.
okay, this seems to go in this bubble, this, and logically kind of look at it in that direction. And that's what I think that's what we want our final product to really only be, is this very big, thoughtful process. And, do it in a timely way that both the core work that the Corps is doing with Nahat Marsh, but mostly also what Howard R. Green is doing, that they think about that as they're looking to help the city in flood mitigation and the kinds of transportation networks. I think that it's extremely important. And to help us kind of direct ourselves to the core of what we would like the end product of Credit Island to be in a big way, but not how to do it.
Yeah. No, I think just to speak to that point, the areas are going to start to subdivide out. They already naturally are, because they're at different levels of development or potentially different levels of utilization. The nice part about also looking at the entire River West Recall as a whole is doing these, kind of thinking at these in a larger scale. Together, you're kind of making sure there is maybe some continuity that ties them together. But yeah, there might be a very different plan for South Concord, like, okay, we're more about property acquisition versus Veteran Memorial Park that continue to develop, or Credit Island do that. But together, I think they'll, it's a holistic picture, but there will be sub pockets of each one. So I agree with that. Anybody else, before we move to our last question, any ideas for improvements or enhancements? We have a lot of good. Hello? I'm sorry, we can't, you're not coming through very clearly. If we can't hear you, you can chat your idea. We can record that. All right.
Hey, Zach, it's, yeah, you're really coming in poor. Are you on a landline, or are you dialed in through your computer for your audio? Yeah, if you would, you could dial into it. That would resolve the issue you're having, so.
Well, for the sake of time, we'll move on to the last question. We can get their answers. So really, the last one kind of wraps it up, is how do we move forward? And we've already kind of talked a little bit about that, obviously there's the planning. But when you think about it, and Bill, you brought up a couple examples, who do we need to partner with? Or what resources to explore? You talked about grants, you talked about purchasing private property. How do you move forward? Does anybody have any ideas of who should, what other examples are out there? Bill, what was that example in Pennsylvania? You said, what was it again? Press Isle, Pennsylvania. So see what else is out there. Who else has rehabbed maybe rougher riverfronts or ideas? Anybody else? How do we move forward with developing these areas? Any other resources or partners?
I just had one
Sure.
kind of comment along that lines. I think that, as you guys are looking at this plan and you're going to identify areas, okay, it would be most beneficial, let's say, if we're going to develop this little portion, because we're going to put a stand or we want to put an entrance or a place for people to put bikes, whatever, right? But it's prone to flooding. It may be beneficial to identify some of these strategic areas where, okay, it makes sense to physically raise this area with backfill or whatever, right? Ahead of time. And knowing that, let's say, as Public Works or as a facility builds a new building in town, or, I think back to the West End when Walmart came in. They moved tens of thousands of, metric tons of dirt out of that location, which didn't look like it really needed to be, but when they actually laid it out, it moved a huge amount of dirt out of that location. And they paid a separate contractor to move all that dirt out and dump it in a field just north of there, because they got permission from the farmer. The farmer was like, yeah, you can dump it in there, and they just dumped dirt. And they did it for weeks and weeks and weeks. I think if we strategically find some of these locations, we're like, hey, this would be a good place to raise it. We're not going to spend a bunch of money on it, but if fill dirt's available and it's clean fill dirt, or Public Works has a project where they have, hey, we've got this stuff we need to dump, where can we put it? And it's good, and it's, this is where we can put it. They already know where it can go, they can just go dump it, no questions asked, and they can move on.
Sure.
I think that would be a good thing.
You got floodplain regulations of how much you can dump, wetland rules are gonna apply.
That's a challenge for that area, is the regulations. Yeah, but that makes me thinking, is there any private partners out there that you can think of, or that you know of, or anybody, or is that something to explore?
Sure.
Well, there's not for profit, there's the Nahan Market Group.
Yep.
River
Action.
There's River Action. There's the Friends of Credit Island. They're kind of, but they're really tied in. I think really in the Riverfront, it's really the core. It's understanding grant systems. It's also looking at the watersheds, the creeks coming into the river there, Blackhawk being one, but there's another one. So it's really, Iowa DNR. Those are partners that we, as we come up with these larger concepts, we need to work with them as they look at the floodplain and kind of marriage it. We need to come to the table with some ideas as a commission. And I think, definitely people want to know as they look at the causeway, is there ever going to be a park here again? Is this over? And I think we need to think big here in terms of what that next 2-3 years can be. It's going to take a long time to get there. The finances of the city, I really understand, but this is an area that I think for our west side of our community, we need to think about. And when I say think big, I don't mean like extravagant things coming in, but think where it's enticing. Think about, like, I would like to tell my community that's in my community.
Something that might stand out. I appreciate that. So as we close, Does anybody have any final comments or any other ideas that they haven't shared? So I guess kind of as we move forward, Steve and I'll get all these notes typed up, and Steve and I will reconvene and we'll continue to move forward on our planning process. And the next group, we're working with Chad Dyson from the Parks Department. And Steve, do you have any closing comment with that?
One thing that I want to add.
Yes.
I've had a chance to read the proposal from H.R. Green for the whole Riverfront. And one of the things that was about the steering committee. I talked to the mayor about that, and he didn't know about it. But I think that from the terms on having a steering committee and having our opinion on it might be appropriate, particularly for a contract that size, and particularly since that overlaps with River West. So that's just a thought.
Okay.
So ultimately, did you say you read the proposal or you read the contract with task?
I only provided, I asked for the request for proposal to see what was in that. And then I asked for all the proposals, but I was only provided with the selected proposal.
So,
It's what they said.
all right, what I've asked for.
So no, nothing else will come up before city council, just that special meeting where we approve the selection.
Yeah, what I'm looking for, the proposal's probably an addendum to it, is the actual contract that the mayor's gonna sign. I mean, there's gotta be a contract and a timetable and usually tasks, and they may still be negotiating some of that. But I think as a commission, we would like to see that too, to see where we can fit in. And I'm sure the Parks Advisory would like to know where they fit in. And we're just hoping where we don't fit in is, another group in the public that day that gets to kind of look at it.
Well, if there's no other comments, I appreciate your time, and then I'll let you guys close out your meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was really nice. Appreciate it. In COVID, we're starting this, it's good. I think that's the very last thing that we have, so our next meeting is the end of August. So I'm looking for adjournment. Second. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
You're welcome.